My stepmom convinced my dad to put my inherited property in her name, saying, "It's only fair, you don't need it." They threw a massive celebration, toasting to their new house. I showed up uninvited and smiled, funny, because I just finalized the sale, your move-out date is next month. Growing up, it was always just me and my dad. My mom passed away when I was young, and even though my dad wasn't the warmest person, he made sure I had everything I needed. We weren't rich, but my grandparents had owned a house, nothing fancy, but fully paid off. Before they passed, they left it to me in their will. My dad always said, "It'll be yours when you're older." It's security. Then she came along. Enter my stepmother, Diana. She was charming at first, overly sweet, the kind of person who clutched your arm when she laughed and always made sure she was the center of attention. Within a year, she moved in. I didn't mind much at first. I was a teenager, more focused on my own life. But slowly, things started changing. Diana wasn't just here to be my dad's wife, she was here to take control. At first, it was little things. She took over decorating the house, getting rid of my mom's old things, saying, "It's time for a fresh start." Then she started pushing for more. She wanted everything in her name. My dad, always eager to keep her happy, started agreeing to her ideas without thinking twice. Then came the big one. One day, they sat me down in the living room. I was in my early 20s at this point, finishing college while working part-time. Diana put on her softest, most understanding voice and said, "We were thinking, since you don't need the house right now, maybe it makes sense to put it in my name instead. Just so it's fair." Fair. The house I inherited. The house my grandparents left for me. I looked at my dad, expecting him to shut it down. But instead, he nodded along. "Yeah, I think it makes sense, kiddo. We're all family, after all." I felt my stomach drop. Diana continued, "We could use it to host family events. Holidays, birthdays, all of us together." She smiled like she was doing me a favor. "Besides, you're young. You'll have plenty of time to get your own place." I said no. Flat out. But they didn't drop it. Over the next 6 months, they kept bringing it up. My dad started getting pushy, acting like I was being selfish. Diana would sigh dramatically and say things like, "I just don't understand why you don't trust me." It was relentless. Then one day, while I was at work, they did it anyway. I came home and found a celebration happening in my grandparents' house. Balloons, a fancy catered dinner, champagne. Diana was giving a toast to her new home. She convinced my dad to sign it over to her behind my back. I stood there in the doorway, watching my stepmother raise a glass and say, "To new beginnings," while my dad clinked his glass with hers, grinning like a fool. That was the moment something inside me snapped. "Fine. You want the house? Let's see how that works out for you." The revenge begins. I walked away without saying a word. Didn't yell, didn't argue. Just left. They didn't even notice. But the next day, I started making calls. See, what Diana didn't realize was that my grandparents had put some safeguards in place. While I legally owned the house, there were conditions in the will. One of them? If I ever transferred ownership unwillingly, I had the right to contest it. And contest it I did. I got a lawyer, gathered my documents, and filed a legal challenge. It was a clear-cut case of coercion. My dad, under pressure from Diana, had signed it over without my consent. Diana, for all her scheming, was not legally savvy. She assumed that once the house was in her name, it was done. She didn't realize I could undo everything. The lawsuit and their downfall for months, they fought back. Diana, especially. She cried in court, played the victim, acted like I was the ungrateful stepchild trying to ruin my father's life. She even accused me of trying to steal from her. But the evidence was solid. Emails, texts, witnesses. I had proof they'd pressured me for months. And when they did it behind my back, that was fraud. The judge ruled in my favor. Not only was the house returned to me, but because they tried to manipulate the transfer, Diana and my dad were ordered to pay my legal fees. And the cherry on top? I decided to sell the house. I wasn't going to live in a place filled with bad memories. But I wasn't going to let them live there either. I waited until the perfect moment. The final blow. Diana, thinking she had won, planned another huge event at the house, a housewarming party. I found out through mutual family members that it was going to be a massive affair. Caterers, expensive decor, dozens of guests. So, I showed up, uninvited. I walked through the front door, a drink in my hand, and smiled at Diana. "Hey, so, funny thing, I just finalized the sale." Her face went white. I took a sip and added, "Your move-out date is next month." Diana didn't speak for a full 5 seconds. Then, in front of all her guests, she screamed, "You can't do this." I took another sip of my drink, savoring the moment. "Actually, I can." And I did. The room went dead silent. My dad rushed over, eyes wide. "Kid, let's talk about this," I cut him off. "Oh, now you want to talk? Funny, because when you gave my house away, you didn't even ask." Diana grabbed his arm. Do something, she hissed, her face turning red. But there was nothing he could do. The sale was final. The new owners were moving in next month. And they had nowhere to go. The financial disaster Diana had made big plans. She thought this house was hers for life, so she and my dad had been spending money like crazy. Expensive vacations, designer clothes, even a new car. All on credit. She assumed they'd refinance the house to pay it off. Now, that option was gone. Reality hit fast. They were broke. And it got worse. The house sale profits? All mine. The court had ruled that since the house was taken from me unfairly, I had full rights to the sale. They got nothing. I didn't even have to evict them, they couldn't afford the mortgage on their own. And that's when Diana snapped. The breakdown 2 days after the party, my dad called me. He was begging. Just let us stay, he pleaded. You don't have to do this. We're family. I didn't answer right away. Family. The same family who tried to gaslight me into giving up my inheritance. The same family who celebrated taking what was mine. You made your choice, I said. Now live with it. Then I hung up. Diana, though, she wasn't going down quietly. She started calling my job lying. She told my boss I was mentally unstable, that I had stolen from my own father, anything she could think of to ruin me. It backfired. One of my coworkers had been at her party. They knew the truth. Instead of losing my job, I got a raise. The twist, she tried to sue me. Diana wasn't done. A month before they had to leave, she filed a lawsuit against me. Her claim? She deserved a portion of the house sale. Her reasoning? She had invested in the house by redecorating and making it a home. Her lawyer tried to argue that since she had improved the house, she should get at least 50% of the profit. I almost laughed in the courtroom. I handed my lawyer every receipt I had. The house was in the exact same condition it was in before she moved in. Her so-called renovations were just new curtains and throw pillows. The judge dismissed her case immediately. And then it got even worse for her. The second lawsuit, Diana had fraudulently claimed my house as her asset when applying for a new line of credit. Her name wasn't even on it yet when she did it, meaning she had taken out thousands of dollars in loans using my house as collateral without my permission. And now that the house wasn't hers, the bank came knocking. She owed a ridiculous amount of money she didn't have. And since my dad's name was on some of the paperwork, he was on the hook, too. They were completely screwed. Diana was spiraling. Her perfect little plan had exploded in her face. But she still had one more trick up her sleeve. The final ACT of desperation. A week before their eviction, I got a text from my dad. Diana is planning something. Be careful. I read it twice. My dad never warned me about anything. If he was saying this, it had to be bad. And I was right. The next day, I got a call from the new owners of the house. They had stopped by early to check on the property and found Diana inside. She had broken in. And she was trashing the place. I drove straight to the house. The new owners had already called the cops, but I needed to see it with my own eyes. When I pulled up, the front door was wide open. Inside, Diana was losing her mind. Furniture flipped over. Broken glass everywhere. She had taken a knife to the walls, huge slashes cut into the drywall, paint peeled away in chunks. She even ripped out the kitchen cabinet doors like some kind of wild animal. The cops were already inside, trying to calm her down. She was screaming at them. I have a right to be here. This is my house. He stole it from me. The officers weren't buying it. One of them turned to me. You the owner? I nodded. Pressing charges? I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to say yes. Wanted to watch her get hauled away in handcuffs, crying about how unfair it all was. But before I could say anything, the new owner stepped in. We're pressing charges, they said. This is destruction of property. That was even better. Because now, it wasn't just me Diana had screwed over. The fraud comes crashing down while Diana was dealing with her arrest. Something else was happening behind the scenes. Remember those loans she took out, using my house as fake collateral? Yeah, the bank was coming for her. The moment she got out on bail, she found out her accounts were frozen. Turns out, lying on a loan application is a crime. The bank had investigated and found out the house was never legally hers, meaning the money she borrowed was fraudulent debt. Now, they wanted it all back. And if she couldn't pay, they were going to sue. I don't know what kind of mental gymnastics she did to justify all of this in her head, but she refused to believe it was over. And then, she pulled one last insane stunt. The fake will. 3 weeks later, I got a call from my lawyer. You're not going to believe this, he said. Diana had forged a will. A new version of my grandparents' will suddenly appeared, claiming they actually meant to leave the house to my dad. Not me. And since he was married to Diana, that meant it belonged to her. I swear, you could not make this up. The best part? It was the worst forgery I had ever seen. The font was different. The signatures didn't match the originals. It was so bad. Even the judge laughed when he saw it. Diana was charged with attempted fraud and tampering with legal documents. That alone was enough to put her deep in legal trouble. But just when I thought this was the final nail in her coffin, something even bigger happened. My dad finally snaps. I was at work when I got the message. From my dad. We need to talk. Please. I ignored it at first. I didn't owe him anything. But then he sent another. I'm divorcing her. I should have listened to you. Please talk to me. I had to read it twice. After everything, after watching her wreck our family, steal from me, try to ruin my life, he was finally done? I wasn't sure if I believed him. But curiosity got the best of me. We met at a diner. He looked horrible. The man had aged 10 years and 6 months. The moment I sat down, he let out a long breath. I messed up, he admitted. I let her control me. I didn't see it until it was too late. I just stared at him. Why now? He looked away. She tried to take my money. Now I laughed. Of course. The moment his bank account was at risk, suddenly he grew a conscience. She emptied our savings, he continued. Took out credit cards in my name. I found out too late. Diana had sunk her claws in deep. And now? She was ditching him. She knew she was losing, so she was grabbing everything she could before running. She's filing for divorce, he admitted. Trying to take half of what I have left. The irony? He had nothing left. His credit was shot. He was in mountains of debt thanks to Diana's schemes. He was ruined. And I didn't feel bad. Not one bit. Diana tries to run. I thought that was the end of it. But Diana wasn't done. She skipped town. Vanished. She was supposed to show up to court for her fraud charges, but she never came. The bank couldn't find her. My dad couldn't find her. She just disappeared. At first, I thought, good riddance. Until the news article came out. A woman matching Diana's description had been caught trying to open a new bank account under a fake identity. In another state. She was arrested. And when they searched her belongings, they found stolen credit cards, fake documents, and over $15,000 in cash. She had run away with every last penny she could steal. And now? She was facing prison time. The fallout. The last time I saw my dad, he was a broken man. The house was gone. His wife was gone. His money was gone. Everything he had thrown away for her had turned to dust. And me? I walked away clean. Debt-free. Financially stable. With every penny from the house sale sitting in my account. And Diana? Well, let's just say prison orange isn't really her color. The final showdown. Diana was in jail. My dad was ruined. And I should have felt satisfied. But there was one last loose end. I hadn't spoken to my dad in months since our last conversation at the diner. He had texted a few times, apologies, half-hearted attempts at reconnecting, but I ignored him. I wasn't interested in his regret. Then, one day, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Diana's lawyer. She wants to see you, he said. I almost laughed. Why the hell would I visit her? She says she has something you need to hear. I didn't care. Not at first. But something nagged at me. A part of me wanted to see her face to face one last time. To watch her sit in that prison jumpsuit, knowing she lost. So I agreed. A prison conversation. Walking into that visitation room was surreal. Diana looked wrecked. The once perfectly styled hair was limp and greasy. Her expensive nails were chipped. She had dark circles under her eyes. But when she saw me, she smirked. Not the reaction I expected. She leaned forward, shackled hands resting on the table. I have something to tell you, she said. I folded my arms. What could you possibly say that I'd care about? She licked her lips, her eyes sharp. Your dad knew about everything. I froze. She leaned in closer. Every single thing. He knew about the fake will. He knew about the loans. He knew I was taking money from his account. Hell, he even helped me forge some of the documents. I stared at her, my pulse pounding in my ears. You're lying, I said. She shrugged. Believe what you want. But you were never his priority. I was. Her words hit harder than I wanted to admit. I had spent months believing my dad was just a weak fool. That he had been manipulated, used, and left with nothing. But if Diana was telling the truth, he wasn't just a fool. He was complicit. She sat back, grinning. You were never his kid first. I made sure of that. I stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. I hope you rot in here, I said. And I meant it. The final confrontation. I didn't plan on confronting my dad. I didn't owe him a damn thing. But the more I thought about it, the more I needed to hear him say it. So I showed up at his apartment. It was a dump. The guy who had celebrated taking my inheritance was now living in a barely furnished one-bedroom with unpaid bills stacked on the table. He opened the door, surprised to see me. Kid, did you know? I asked, cutting straight to it. Did you help Diana steal from me? He hesitated. And that was my answer. I let out a sharp laugh. Wow. She was right. His face fell. It's not what you think. I shook my head. No, it's exactly what I think. His hands clenched. I didn't want to lose her. His voice cracked. She said if I didn't go along with it, she'd leave. I stared at him in disbelief. So you let her take everything from me? He ran a hand down his face, looking exhausted. I thought I could fix it before it got out of hand. I scoffed. And when exactly was that? Before or after she forged a will? Before or after she stole money in my name? He didn't answer. I felt something inside me snap. All those years, you let her treat me like I didn't matter. And I kept making excuses for you. I thought, maybe he's just blind to it. Maybe he's stuck. But no, you chose her. Tears welled in his eyes. I never meant to hurt you. But you did, I said. And now? You have to live with it. For the first time, he had nothing to say. I turned to leave. And he let me. The aftermath: Diana's fraud charges stuck. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison. The bank took legal action against my dad. He ended up filing for bankruptcy. He tried to call me a few times after that, but I never picked up. One day, he left a voicemail. I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope you're okay. I never called back. Closure: a year later, I stood outside my new house. My house, one that I bought on my own, with my own money. I had left that entire chapter of my life behind. Diana was locked away. My dad had disappeared into his own mess. And me? I was finally free. I took a deep breath, letting the past go. Then I walked inside, closing the door behind me. And I never looked back. The end.